This is the fourth entry in a series of reviews I've written discussing my thoughts on the Game Awards nominees for Game of the Year in 2020. There isn't a predetermined order for the reviews in this series, but they were produced with the intention of to be watched as a whole. I've personally completed all of the nominees on my own time, and for full context, I recommend you play through them as well before watching this review. I see no need to dress this up. Hades was my favorite game I played this year. I would say there was fierce competition, but nothing really comes close to how much I genuinely appreciate this game. This is the type of game where I really have to remember that it was produced by a group of extremely talented people and not some kind of perfect game creating machine. Where Hades succeeds is the most important place of all for a game, and the interplay between its narrative components and its mechanics. Hades is a roguelike, a half-measure name for a half-measure genre. Roguelikes can be anything from a platformer to a dungeon crawler to simply text, like Rogue itself. And yet, no game has captured the spirit of a roguelike to me than Hades. I'm not a big fan of the name or the genre, but I know enough to tell you that roguelikes live and die on their mechanical interactions, which is to say, how complex, varied, and mingled their character builds, enemies, and maps can become. If a game is lacking in variety in any of these departments, playthroughs tend to feel samey, and for a genre that asks you to start from step 1 every time, I couldn't think of a bigger death knell. For this problem, Hades' biggest boon is its boon system, wherein the Greek pantheon offers the player, Zagreus, a new ability or modification to aid him on his trip from the depths. Everyone will surely have their favorites and tier lists, but my favorite to run always ended up being Artemis and Hermes, whose boons stacked up really nicely on top of my bow. The possibilities within this system for interesting builds is potentially limitless when stacking up all the different skills, gears, and weapons you amass over the course of the game. The robust systems powering the combat alone are worthy of note, but as I said earlier, Hades' true shining achievement is how these mechanics are pulled into its narrative. When I was young, I remember Supergiant Games making waves on the Xbox Live Arcade with their debut title, Bastion. Bastion, while on the surface was a more than competent isometric action game, seemed to strike a certain chord with their audience over the inclusion of one particularly verbose narrator. The idea here being, while your solemn young protagonist hammers away at his ghastly Gasfella foes, the gruff voice of a wizened elder, also a character in the game, would chime in to elucidate on your accomplishments, or like if you fell off the map or something. Many aspects of Hades' DNA can be traced back to that original game, from the bow's frame-perfect charge shots to the mixed media art style. But the most significant thread here is how that adaptive dialogue has evolved into an omnipotent narrative of over a dozen characters content to comment to you and each other on the developments in your adventure. I can happily report that despite the unbelievable amount of writing this sort of system would require, the quality of the writing in this game shows absolutely no strain. The quality of the writing in Hades is the best I've seen in the whole of the industry at this very moment. The premise of Hades' story is remarkably simple. After the last straw is drawn in a long and tumultuous kinship with his father, the god of the dead Hades, the god prince Zagreus seeks to escape his captivity in the realm of the dead at any cost. It definitely never struck me how well this kind of classic Greek mythology setup would work with roguelike specifically, but in retrospect it's basically a no-brainer. The synergy between the theming and the gameplay is simply too good. The game's large cast is incredibly well performed and written, each always has something snappy, interesting, and relevant to say whenever they're encountered. Some of my favorites include Megara, the ice-tongued Fury sister who's tasked with stopping Zagreus before he can leave Tartarus, and Sisyphus, a soft-spoken strongman who always makes time to support his friend Zagreus while on break from his eternal damnation of rock pushing. There are a couple of characters who I couldn't help but love to hate as well, most notably the egotistical hero King Theseus and Hades himself. The deaths that felt most significant to me were always to these two, but for absolutely different reasons. When I died to Hades, by the end of our match there was always an area where I felt like I could have improved, whether it had been in managing my health better throughout my entire run, or making full use of my call and cast abilities. Theseus, on the other hand, is just the worst. Theseus has this juxtaposition of being the only boss who actively talks down to you as a denizen of the underworld, while shamelessly taking the advantage of a stacked 2v1 gladiator match against you. I don't know what anyone could see in this guy, honestly, but all these characters are just so gosh darn charming and their dialogue is so good that I'm sure there just has to be someone out there who can't get enough of him. Overall, Hades is the complete package. It's a wonderfully realized game that makes full use of its concept, which is a rare sight among games as far as I'm concerned. While many games this year seemed content to push their gameplay and narratives further apart, Hades stands as a shining example of how the interactive medium can be used to further the themes of a great story in even the most unlikely genre. Hades provides far and away the most compelling and memorable experience I had in a new game this year, and I implore anyone with the slightest interest to check it out. It will be well worth your time.